Very happy to be joined once again by Mohammad Marandi, who teaches at the University of Tehran. Professor, thanks so much for being back with us.
Hi, Eugene. Thank you for having me.
Well, great to have you. And I guess now that we're hearing something about retaliatory attacks on Al Udeid Air Base, on perhaps U.S. assets in Iraq and other places, I wonder how you're seeing the situation in this moment.
Well, obviously, the Iranians had to retaliate. And since the American regime, the Trump regime, did not kill any Iranian citizens in its airstrike, I think that the Iranians decided probably to do the same. But it is, I think, a show of strength where Iran strikes American air bases, especially Qatar in particular, because that is where CENTCOM has its forward base. In other words, it is in control of all of the bases. It commands all of the bases across the region that are controlled by the United States. So by striking CENTCOM, that is probably the most important, the strongest message that Iran can give. Now, I don't know if Iran is going to strike other bases as well, but it is a show of strength that Iran is able to strike the Israeli regime and simultaneously punish the Trump regime, which is quite a feat in itself.
I mean, it's really incredible to see that you have all of these American officials constantly, portraying Iran as this incredibly irrational actor. They can't have a nuke. They'd absolutely use it. They're crazy with their ballistic missiles. And, Iran, the Iranian regime is so evil. But, at every point, all of the all of the aggression, unprovoked aggression, and all of the insanity is coming from the Israeli and American side. And at every place you see the Iranians want an off-ramp. They want to de-escalate because they don't want war, which is the rational response. But of course, you also have to respond when you're hit. So I'm just curious about the Israeli factor here, because you could have a scenario where, like you said, the Americans didn't kill any Iranians in their attacks on those nuclear sites. So the response is to, hit these bases and not necessarily cause casualties, which they absolutely could cause casualties. But then there's the Israeli factor, because Donald Trump, the Americans, who knows, they're insane. But they may say, okay, Iran responded, nobody died, we're done here. But the war with Israel continues. So I'm curious how you see that aspect of this playing out.
Well, the Israelis, when they launched their unprovoked attack, they murdered lots of innocent people. And they brought down apartment blocks with everyone inside, killing many, many children. Today, we had a significant number of civilians murdered. In Tabriz, there were two 7-year-old boys who were buried. And we have the same across the board. They bombed ambulances, they bombed hospitals, they bombed the Red Crescent. This is, and it's the point that you make is important. Iran is the evil side, whereas it's the United States and the Israeli coalition that's carrying out the Holocaust in Gaza, the genocidal attacks. And Rania, you and I both have lived in Beirut. We know how the Israeli regime was massacring people in Dahiya in southern Beirut, and destroying the whole south of Beirut, whereas Western journalists were saying these are Hezbollah strongholds, and other cities as well. So Western mainstream journalists or legacy media journalists were providing cover for the regime, but they were slaughtering ordinary people, yet they are the civilized world. They, although they're ethno-supremacists, although they view Palestinians and others as subhuman, they are the free world, and we are the evil ones, and we are always demonized. I was on Democracy Now! Today, and the host, Amy, I forget her name, she was talking about the Iranian regime, and she's supposedly anti-war. So she was talking about the Iranian regime, and then she spoke about the notorious Evin prison, and then she brought on a guest with me, and the guest was saying they execute people simply because they protest. these narratives that they create, these which are all false, and no one was executed in Iran ever for protesting, but that's how it is in the West. They depict Iran, and they demonize Iran. Even the so-called anti-war people, the left, many of the left in the left, they depict Iran in this as a menace, as evil. They've been doing it for 4.5 decades now, and that justifies aggression. That justifies murder and atrocity. That's why many people in the West, they support these strikes. And you see those who supposedly oppose war, like Democracy Now, in a sense, demonizing Iran. And then I saw CNN talking about Iranian sleeper cells in the United States. I mean, CNN is no different from Fox News. They're trying to, again, demonize their own American citizens in the United States in order to create fear, again, to justify war and aggression. So it's very difficult to distinguish between many of these trends in the United States, but all of them do one thing, and that is they justify aggression, willingly or otherwise. In the case of Democracy Now, maybe that's not the objective, but in any case, that's what they do effectively. And if you say anything other than, yes, of course, we shouldn't bomb Iran, even though it is, you have to say, even though it is evil. Otherwise, you're attacked by the mainstream and you're seen as propagandist or a mouthpiece. But that's how it works. In order for the United States and the establishment to maintain control, the other side has to be evil. And so Iran, as you pointed out, is the responsible actor. Iran never initiated war. Iran never intended to use or develop a nuclear weapon. All the sites that the Americans and the Israeli regime bombed, they were monitored by the International Atomic Energy Agency regularly. Their investigators were constantly inside these buildings and these installations, but you won't hear that in the Western media. And then you see people like Tulsi Gabbard flipping. One day she's saying the truth that Iran is not developing nuclear weapons. Iran never was. Even before 2003, Iran was not developing nuclear weapons. The International Atomic Energy Agency never said such a thing. But then she flips because that's what they want her to do.
Sorry, before I know Eugene's got a question for you, but I just want to point out about the prison that the Israelis bombed. I really find it so stunning that was something that was celebrated when, if you're claiming to be against this prison, wouldn't bombing the prisoners at it be bad for the prisoners that you're championing the release of? I just found that to be like a bizarre contradiction, but Eugene, go ahead.
No, it's certainly an interesting one. I mean, we just had Vijay Prashad on, who noted, of course, that Iran is, one of the oldest civilizations on earth, a very proud country. I mean, you yourself are a veteran, and I was hoping you could speak to this issue that I feel is this American triumphalism type thing that, it's easy to push over any of these countries, Iran, like whatever, regime change, we'll do this, we'll take that out, which feels quite Pollyannish to me.
Yes, unfortunately, that's something that exists in the United States. Even in 2016, as you recall, when Trump was elected and he was Putin's puppet and a Russian agent, when he decided to fire missiles at Syria, and back then they used the OPCW, just like the International Atomic Energy Agency. All of these international bodies that were created post-Second World War are controlled by the West. And so they are judge, jury, and executioner. And so back then, when Trump started firing missiles at Syria and killing people there, suddenly even his opponents, who were calling him Putin's puppet, they applauded him and said he's finally turned into the president. So waging war and killing people is something, unfortunately, that is celebrated, at least in mainstream American culture. Mainstream meaning the powerful institutions and cultural institutions that make up a lot of U.S. culture or manufacture U.S. culture or guide U.S. culture. They celebrate this sort of thing, and a lot of Americans fall for it. So And this is, I think, what is destroying the United States. These never-ending wars. If ordinary Americans saw the world in a different light, they would not have allowed the United States to invade Iraq. They would not have allowed the United States to destroy Libya. They would not have allowed the United States to engage in a dirty war using ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria, and they would not have allowed the United States to engage in a genocidal attack on Yemen by supporting Saudi Arabia for so many years. But that is a problem. That I think that is what makes the United States exceptional, actually. The exceptionalism of the United States in it is in the violence that it pursues and the arrogance which its elites promote.
Mohammad Marandi, I have to ask you, I think everyone's question now becomes what Iran will do next, because something that's been a topic of conversation, I think it was passed in the Iranian parliament, was the idea of shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. And I know that has to be approved by Iran. I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, by Iran's Supreme National Security Council. I don't know if that's the name of it, but either way, sounds quite democratic that it has to go through so many rules and has to be approved by so many people in Iran. I'm just saying, whereas in America, we just have a president that can just start bombing things without anybody getting to vote on it, even the people that we vote to supposedly represent us. But anyway, all that's to say, I imagine that there's also a domestic concern in Iran too. Israel is bombing and killing civilians. The U.S. is arming Israel and then joined in and bombed these nuclear facilities that are used for peaceful nuclear energy. And, you know, like any citizens in any country, I'm sure Iranians want their government to respond and in many ways demand their government respond. So I'm curious, you know, what do you think is going to happen in terms of the government's decision on the Strait of Hormuz, especially because, I mean, obviously that can shut down much of the global economy, especially when it comes to the movement of oil shipments, but also could backfire on Iran. So I'm sure there's a lot to take into consideration when it comes to that.
Well, first, I want to go back to the prison issue. There's no footage of Iranian officers or jailers raping people, but we do have footage of Israelis raping people. Yet Iranian prisons are notorious. And in the United States, I think you two know a lot better than I about the culture and the situation in many prisons where people like Epstein can easily be suicided and nothing happens. So it's really extraordinary for the United States and Western countries to talk about Iran. And you are right. There are many checks and balances in Iran. In Iran, there's the parliament, the guardian council, the expediency council. All of them are involved, and also the Supreme National Security Council. But in the United States, it's King Trump or King Biden, and who wages war or who imposes tariffs. He does what he wants whenever he wants, and he changes direction whenever he wants. If that is something that is usually attributed to Iran, that Iran is this dictatorship that's irrational and it's unpredictable and you know, a threat to the world. Yet it's the United States that's constantly bombing country after country. In this case, I don't know what Iran is going to do. I think a lot will depend on the United States. The Iranians don't want to expand the war. They didn't want the war in the first place. They want the genocide to stop. They want the Holocaust in Gaza to stop. And it is happening as we speak. We should not allow it to be forgotten that as we speak, they're slaughtering children. Today, they've slaughtered a large number of children. Every day, morning to night, the footage comes out. I tweet some of these disturbing footage. I don't like doing this, but I want to always remind people that something bad is going on. Some people have muted me because they say they just can't stand the footage. And I understand that. The only reason why I keep posting these things, I want to remind people day and night that, look, this is not stopped. It's not going away. They're doing it day and night. You wake up in the morning, it's happened last night. You go to sleep at night, it's happening as you fall asleep. So for Iran does not want a regional war. It wants this genocide to stop. And the reason why these attacks have taken place against Iran is because Iran is opposed to ethno-supremacism and ethnic cleansing and genocide. That's it. The nuclear program, there's no evidence that it was ever anything but peaceful. The board of governors in the International Atomic Energy Agency is comprised of 35 members. People can look it up. It's dominated by Western governments. If I'm not mistaken, 17 European and North American, Japan and Korea, that gives them the absolute majority. They can condemn whoever they like, whenever they like. So it's not a democratic body. But the technical experts at the International Atomic Energy Agency have never said that we have evidence that Iran is producing a nuclear weapon. Iran has a nuclear power plant. It needs to be able to produce energy, because if tomorrow the United States sanctions it, then we'll have to shut down our power plant as well as the other power plants that they're building. 20% enrichment is needed for medical isotopes, which we, for cancer patients and for other things that we do in Tehran. And the 60%, I've said this for years. I've said this on BBC Hard Talk during the negotiations 3 years ago in Vienna when I was the media advisor for the team, that this is for leverage. If Iran does not have leverage, do you think the United States is ever going to remove sanctions on women and children? If they would, why don't they remove sanctions for Cuba, which is where people are suffering day and night? They remove it for ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria, but not for Cuba, and they'll never remove it for Iran willingly. So they know this. Everyone knows this. The Western media knows this. Western elites know this. But they choose not to say this. They choose to demonize Iran because this is an empire that wants to remain in place. But the problem is that this very same empire that wants to remain in place is destroying the UN Charter. It is destroying all these institutions that it created in order to maintain its own hegemony. And it's undermining all of them. That is what's extraordinary. And it shows that it's not Iran that's irrational. It is the United States and its European allies that are irrational.
No, absolutely. I think you can see that they are pushing a might makes right sort of reality on the world, that there is no way to actually negotiate or have any sort of equal relations. And that feels to me like, you know, sort of the natural extension of exactly what you're saying, is that for the US, for Europe, it's unacceptable to have a world where they have to treat anyone else with equality, especially in the global South. And the sort of racism of the nature of this imperialism just seems so clearly on display when we look at this issue of how Iran is being treated.
And you know, there's another interesting thing here. A lot of young Iranians, they did not experience the revolution. They did not experience the war where the United States and the Europeans gave Saddam Hussein chemical weapons and where they supported Saddam Hussein in his invasion of the country. They lived through sanctions, which has made life in Iran difficult in its own way. But many of them have been influenced by the West, and they were influenced by Western narratives. And they thought that liberalism and liberal democracy is, you know, the best way for any country to be able to develop. And then these young people who have been, in a sense, westernized or sympathetic to the West or supportive of the West, their whole worldview has been shattered gradually over the last 21 months when they've been seeing in Gaza. But when the United States supported the Israelis as Iran was negotiating, when they supported their aggression against Iran, that shattered their worldview and their faith in anything Western. And then when the United States itself brought about an unprovoked attack and war and such an extreme act of violence, again, shattered further. So the United States has basically taught the younger generation in Iran, where many of them were thinking differently, or let's say they believed Western narratives, they taught them not to believe them, and that the West is indeed aggressive, abusive, murderous, supportive of ethno-supremacist regimes that have nuclear weapons, that carry out genocide, but they will victimize you and make all sorts of claims about you, all of them without foundation or basis. And again, I go back to CNN. CNN today said they were speaking about sleeper cells in the United States. That's disgusting. What they're doing is demonizing ordinary Americans who may be Iranian or Arab or Pakistani or Asian or somehow sympathetic or friendly towards Iran. They will be singled out. They will feel threatened. And the objective there is to create an environment which would justify further death and destruction directed at ordinary Iranians in Iran.
Mohammad Marandi, as we wrap with you here, I want to, I guess, ask you where you see this going from here. I mean, I guess you can't really predict how the U.S. is going to respond to the response. But it does seem like, I keep bringing up the Israel factor, but I think it's an important one because this is a country that you've mentioned has been committing genocide for the last 20 months. Is continuing to commit the worst horrors we've seen this year. I mean, just today, they bombed Tehran, they bombed Lebanon, and of course, they continue to bomb Gaza. Sometimes they're bombing 5 countries at a time. There's been days where they've bombed Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, all on the same day. I mean, it's insane. It seems like, honestly, at this point, it's giving really Nazi Germany vibes where, I kind of saw the Israeli attack on Iran as like the Germans invading Poland. And so I'm just curious what you see happening in the region with this menace, because it's not going to stop. The Israelis are, as you see, completely out of control.
And then, of course, there's the West Bank, where they're regularly killing people and they're carrying out ethnic cleansing, constantly destroying people's homes and so on. I don't know where it's going to go, Rania. I have no clear idea. It depends on what happens next. If the United States chooses to get into a fight with Iran, I believe that it will create a global economic meltdown. I think it will lead to an economic depression that will be far worse than the 1930s. And it's not just oil and gas in the Persian Gulf, it's the whole of West Asia and the Caucasus. I think that many in the United States don't recognize how dangerous the situation is for the globe. And Trump's recklessness has pushed us very close to such a situation. On the other hand, with regards to the Israeli regime, I don't know how this is going to end, but Iran is determined to make sure that the Israelis feel that they made a grave mistake by carrying out this aggression. Iran is adamant that the Israeli regime does not feel that it has achieved any success, because if it is allowed to feel that way, then that would encourage it to carry out further aggression in future. And we know that whatever the Israeli regime does, whatever aggression it carries out, whatever it does to anyone anywhere, the Europeans and the Americans will support it. Even when they subtly criticize it, it's only to decrease pressure from the public on themselves. Otherwise, after almost 21 months of genocide, there are no sanctions against the Israeli regime coming from Europe or North America or Australia or New Zealand or Japan or Korea. They're all in it together. So it's very unclear to me how this will end, whether on the front with the United States or with the Israeli regime. But Iran is determined to make sure that aggression by the United States or the Israelis have no dividends for them.
Well, very kinetic environment, as they say. So a lot to continue to follow here as we go into the next hours and days. Mohammad Marandi, we really appreciate you, as always, coming and help us sort through what we know in this moment.
Thank you very much for having me.